Hello everyone. Let's explore the topic for this week. It is called failure mode and effect analysis, or FMEA for short. Failure mode and effect analysis may show up in the PMP exam, or it may also show up in PMI ACP exam. So if you are preparing for any of these certification exams, you probably want to know a bit more about this topic and how as a project management professional you can apply it in a given scenario. Okay, so first of all, let's understand the origin of this failure mode and effect analysis technique. It has its origin in a manufacturing domain, and basically what this FMEA is a structured and a systematic assessment technique, okay, which is commonly used or can be commonly used in a project management and various industries to identify and prioritize some of the potential failure modes of the process or of the system or of the product, and their potential effects on the goals of the project, right? So obviously let's explore it a little bit more. Let's break it down into a few key areas. So here are the three things that you need to understand when it comes to FMEA. First is the failure modes, right? So obviously, the ways in which a system or a process can fail basically corresponds to the failure mode. So, what are the different ways in which a system or a process can fail? That's the failure mode. How do you identify that as a project team? Well, you can use some commonly used or well-known techniques such as brainstorming or SWOT analysis, right? So brainstorming, as you might know, is the technique in which you can involve cross-functional team members across the project and involve them in a brainstorming session where the focus is to let this team identify the various failure modes of the project or of the process, right? So the idea here is, if you involve all these cross functional team members and these diverse set of stakeholders into the brainstorming workshop, they may uncover the failure modes of the project or of the process across multiple areas. So for example, if you involve the legal team in the failure mode brainstorming session, they may tell you about the failure modes from the legal perspective, for example, right? So it's always helps to involve cross functional teams to kind of diversify and identify as many failure modes as possible across the different areas of the project. SWOT is again one of the popular techniques used in project management. It basically stands for strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And the threats part of the SWOT analysis can give project team about the failure modes. Now, these failure modes could be technical in nature. It could be a functional. They could be functional in nature. They could be process related or organization related. So there could be different types of failure modes, and as I mentioned, like using these different identification techniques, these failure modes can be identified. Okay, so I mean, these are not the only we can say two identification techniques. There are other techniques which you can definitely apply, but these are certainly some of the common ones that can be used. Okay, now, once these failure modes are identified, it is important for the project team to know the root cause or the factors for each of these failure mode. Okay, so that's the important step. Once you know that there could be a failure in certain area, you should know the causes of it. Okay, how as a project team you can identify these causes, again by applying some of these well-known techniques, right? Like for example, I mentioned fishbone diagram or a ishikawa diagram or a cause and effect diagram, right? So this is more like a tool or a technique which is used to identify the failure And then the project team can brainstorm and categorize these potential root causes under different branches of these Ishikawa diagram. And then you can go further in detail about the various, we can say, different branches, such as people, process, equipment, material, and environment, that could potentially have the root cause. So again, very common technique to identify the root cause. Okay. 5Y, as the name suggests, is a technique in which the project team can ask why repeatedly, to dig deeper into the causes behind a failure mode. By asking why multiple times, or 5 times, the project team can uncover the underlying factors which are contributing to the problem. And this technique basically helps to move beyond some superficial causes and reach to the core issue, right? So that's why this 5 why analysis can be important here, to identify the causes of the failure mode. Okay. So again, these are the two techniques that I mentioned here, but there can be more common techniques, such as expert interview or even brainstorming can be used here. So you can engage the whole project team, or at least some of the key project team members and stakeholders and subject matter experts in discussion, to kind of brainstorm the potential root cause. The collective knowledge and insight can help identify the underlying issues. I think the main point here is, especially in an agile environment, is to involve multiple team members and do all these exercises of identifying the failure modes, or identifying the causes of the failure mode, in a collaborative fashion, right? So in an agile project, you would want to focus on involving the team members in doing these kind of exercises. Okay. One more thing that can be useful is doing some historical analysis as well, right? So if your project team is doing a thing which is already has been done in the past by other teams in your organization, then maybe you can pull that historical data, examine the historical data from a similar project or from the past experience, and then you can look for some recurring patterns or common factors which contributed to the failures in those cases, right? And then you can apply the learning from those past experiences. The whole point is, it is important to note that identifying the root cause will require a combination of these methods, and a collaborative approach, right? So whether you use brainstorming or SWOT analysis, or any other ways to identify the root cause, the main point is to, I mean, the goal here is to uncover the fundamental issues which contribute to the project failure, right? So that's the main goal here, so that once what can fail and what are the causes of those failures, once you know these things, as a project team, you can develop the strategies, effective strategies, to deal with these situations. Of course, once you know all these failures and the causes of them, it is important to understand the impact of all these failures that can have on project's objective, right? You can think of whether these failure modes can impact the scope, or the schedule, or the budget, or the quality of the project, or does it impact any other key project success factor. So that impact assessment is very important once you know these different failure modes and the causes of them. Okay. I have mentioned this in a diagram here. So this application of failure mode and effective analysis can be like a 4-step process, right? The first step is the identification part. So as a project team, you are identifying the processes, the activities, the failure modes, and what is causing them. So this is the identification phase. You are gathering all this information through brainstorming, through root cause analysis, and all these other techniques that we discussed. Once you know all of that, once you know your failure areas, or different failure modes, then as a project team, you can do the impact assessment, right? So that's determining the effect or the impact on the project of these different failure modes, right? So that's like a step 2. So identification and then the impact assessment, right? Next step is very interesting. It's about doing the real objective calculation of the RPN, or risk probability number. And then based on that, uh, based on the RPN, you will be focusing on addressing the highest priority failure modes. So let's dive a little bit deep into the third step here. So the third step is actually calculating the risk priority number, or RPN. How do you calculate the risk priority number? Well, the calculation of the risk priority number for each failure mode can be done by multiplying the severity of the failure mode, or the occurrence of the failure mode, and some of the detection ratings. The main point here is to understand that higher the RPN, the more critical the failure mode will be. Okay, so it's a simple numerical value which will, which will hint you, as a project team, which failure modes you should be focusing on. So higher the value of the RPN, that represents the more critical failure mode. Okay, simple and straightforward. And then once the team knows which RPN they need to look at, then they should take the appropriate action, right? So focusing on addressing the highest priority failure modes first, because you may or may not have sufficient time to address every single failure mode. You may only want to address few of the critical ones first, at least. Okay, so yeah, these are the four steps in the application of failure mode and effect analysis. I've mentioned here one example, and this is coming from, let's imagine, like a software development team or a software development project, and this team is working on a web-based e-commerce application. So think of Amazon, for example, right? So this kind of web-based e-commerce application allow users to browse the product. You can add the items to the cart, and then you can, proceed with the checkout, right? So it's a typical web application, e-commerce application. And for such team, or for such project, what could be the, if this team is performing the failure mode and effect analysis to identify the potential failures, how it may look like, right? So I've mentioned a couple of examples here. So you can think of user registration as one example, and another is the payment processing, right? So let's imagine that the users are trying to register or open an account on this e-commerce web application, right? And the users are unable to do so. They are not able to register themselves on this e-commerce web application. Now this is a failure mode, right? This clearly is a failure mode for this kind of e-commerce application. Now as a project team, you can identify that as a failure mode, like the unsuccessful registration as a failure mode example here. And what can cause this? So there could be several reasons, right? Like the server could be down, or the database connectivity might be lost, or there could be some validation errors because of which the registration is not happening. So the causes could vary depending on the domain. For example, if this is a manufacturing project, the potential causes or the mechanisms of failure will be different, right? But the point here is the team is identifying a certain specific function, identifying the failure mode in that particular function, and then listing down the potential causes of the failure, right? And what would be the impact if the users are not able to register or sign up on these e-commerce application? Obviously users will not be able to, cannot access their personalized features if they cannot log in or cannot sign up on these platforms, right? So cannot access the personalized feature could be an impact of this failure. Or the more obvious impact will be the loss of the potential customers, right? So if users are not able to register themselves, then potentially the customers will not be able to, proceed further and then use this platform, right? So if you look at the RPN number here, the risk priority number, it's on a higher side, like 121. How they reach this calculation? Well, as I said, there is like a mathematical formula using which these RPN can be calculated. uh, the formula to calculate the risk priority number is, generally, you will identify the severity, and you will identify the likelihood of the occurrence and the detectability. Okay, and you multiply them, and that gives you the value of the risk priority number. The RPN value provides a ranking for each failure mode, and it allows the project team to prioritize their effort. As we mentioned, right, higher the RPM value indicate more critical failure mode, which requires maybe an immediate attention and some kind of a mitigation plan by the project team. Lower RPN values indicate less critical failure modes, and it may still need to be addressed eventually, right? But with the relative lower urgency. So, if you look at this example, which is in our slide, maybe the user registration related failure mode will take the higher priority compared to a payment processing failure mode, right? So, yeah, again, this is based on the the formula or the calculations related to the risk priority number. It is important to note that while the RPM is a useful tool for prioritization, it has its own limitations, right? It is based on subjective rating, and different team members may assign different ratings based on their own perspective. Additionally, just focusing solely on RPM values may lead to overlooking other important factors, such as potential synergies between the failure modes or the effectiveness of the existing controls, right? So, I mean, the main point is the risk priority number. Because it's a numerical value, you can do this assessment of the failure mode ranking in a more objective way. I think that is where the RPM has its value. Some project teams may decide to call out recommended actions in case of those failure modes. For example, in case of user registration failure mode, the team can do a more rigorous testing. They can run like a beta testing program to test the user registration for a large set of users, right? Like 500 plus users, and then the registration should happen across the multiple regions in order to test the different scenarios under which the user registration is happening or not. So this could be an example of the failure mode and effect analysis technique. One more example I mentioned here, that of the payment processing. Again, the same thing, like the user may experience some errors or issues when they are trying to make a payment for their orders, right? And what can cause this? It could be due to various reasons, right? It could be due to a user might be using an expired login session, or there could be some integration issues with the payment gateway, or there could be a total calculation errors, incorrect order total calculations, and things like that. So the potential mechanisms and failures, as I mentioned, may vary from domain. And again, it will have a different impact here, right? So for example, in case of payment processing errors, there could be lost in sales for the company. Obviously, there will be frustrated customers if they are not able to make the payment, and this could lead to damage to the reputation of the company. So all in all, what this team is trying to do is identify those different areas in which the failure can happen, right? The failure modes. They are also identifying the potential causes or the mechanisms of those failures. They are trying to understand the impact that it may have, and then they are ranking them so that the higher priority ones will get the immediate attention, and then they are coming up with some recommended actions, such as in case of payment processing, they may try some well-known payment processing library in their software module in order to mitigate that risk, right? So yeah, I think these are the things that you should need to know for your exam. And yeah, if it shows up in the exam, you probably know, like, what are those various steps involved in the failure mode and effective analysis, and how to do, like, the step by step identification and planning related to addressing those issues. So if you have any feedback or any questions or comments on this topic, do let me know, and I will be happy to share further details. Thank you.